Hello
Hello there.
there. Welcome back to another episode of Star Wars in a Galaxy, watching all the Star Wars we can get our hands on. I'm Eli,
I'm Jacob,
and this
and
is episode 89 of Star Wars in a Galaxy.
this is a
Absolutely.
very special episode because it is the birthday of my dear friend and dear co-host Eli. Big shout out, Eli. You've done an amazing job with this show. I'm so happy to be on this journey with you, to be your friend. I want to give you a shout out, give you your props. You've created something really amazing. I'm so happy to have created this with you, and I'm so excited for so much more to come. I'm just hyped.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This is coming out way past that, but we were
Oh,
recording this
okay.
on. No, no, it's totally fine. I just wanted to give some context for people listening. This is coming out on November 25th.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. That's not too
Um,
bad.
yeah, so yeah, it was so we recorded this on Saturday, November 19th, which is indeed my birthday. And I'm very excited to schedule this into the day. Again, one of the highlights of my week doing this show. And really, I'm really glad because these three episodes are fantastic. And I was telling you this before we started recording, but I forgot how much I love these episodes. I really did. I forgot how much all three of these really hit for me. Like, honestly, when I tell you, like, if you ask me what my biggest hopes for Bad Batch season two are, it's that there are episodes like these three.
What wait, what about these episodes? What about these episodes stands out to you?
One of the things I really like that the show is doing is again, and this is something that I know that friend of the show Alden Diaz talks about a lot. How Star Wars shows often expand beyond
They
the
expand
realm
beyond
of,
the subject of the show.
yeah, the realm of their name. So
Yeah.
like it's not like Rebels is not just about like the crew. It's about the entire galaxy at the time of the crew. The Mandalorian is, the entire galaxy through the eyes of Din. It's not just about Din. It's about Bo-Katan. It's about Cobb Vanth. It's about Ahsoka. It's about all these characters through the eyes of Din Djarin.
Yeah.
And I love Star Wars capacity to do that. And what I love about the Bad Batch is, like, it is obviously the story of the Bad Batch, but it's also the story of the early Imperial era. And these three episodes are very much the story of the early Imperial era. These are these all three of these are about how the empire impacts ordinary people and people who either liked the republic or didn't, and how actually similar their response to both of them are.
I was noticing how eerily similar the opening scene of Common Ground and the opening scene of Devil's Deal were. And then I realized,
Absolutely.
wait, like this is the Empire's MO. They don't care if you were Republic, they don't care if you were Separatist, none of that matters because it was all a ruse. All that matters is that you are now a subject of the Empire.
Yeah,
So you better get used to it.
it does not matter, and that's one of the main things we'll get into with Common Ground is, and that I feel like is the main theme, which is that the Bad Batch and Senator Singh have radically different pasts, but they all share the same future under the Empire.
Absolutely, yeah.
It could not matter less what their pasts were because their futures are exactly the same. Their futures are to be subjugated by the Empire unless they fight back.
Very well
Uh,
said. Very well
and
said.
and it's that crazy realization, and we'll get to it with the episode. But moving on to summaries, let's see. Could you do maybe you'll do Common Ground and I'll do the last two?
Sounds good, yeah.
Okay.
So speaking of Common Ground, in Common Ground, we open on the Separatist capital planet of Raxus, which has now been conquered by the Republic and is being subjugated by the Empire. We see Senator Avi Singh is being forced by an Imperial officer to basically be a mouthpiece for the Empire and use his good standing and popularity with the citizens of Raxus to kind of sign off on the imperial subjugation. However, at the last second, as he's addressing this crowd, at the last second, he changes his mind and he stands up and he says, you know what, this is this is crap. I'm not doing this. He is imprisoned. He is taken away, and the protesters outside of the palace where he's giving the address are intimidated and dispersed by the clones. His droid is able to send a distress signal, which reaches Sid, and Sid relays this as a job to the Bad Batch. So the Bad Batch, with some reluctance, end up heading to the Separatist capital world of Raxus to rescue a Separatist senator, Avi Singh. A lot of hijinks and action ensue. They infiltrate the palace. They are able to rescue Avi Singh. And although he is very reluctant to leave his homeworld and his people who need him to resist, they need him to stand up and they need him to resist the occupation of the Empire. The Bad Batch convinces him that sometimes the best thing to do is to live to fight another day. And they
Absolutely.
leave the planet.
Absolutely. Before we got into it, there is also another subplot in the episode, which is that they leave Omega behind at
Oh, of
Sid's
course, yeah.
bar.
They leave Omega behind, and she becomes a. She's very sad and put out to have been left off the mission, which Hunter deems simply too dangerous to take her on. However, she soon forgets all about that because Sid realizes that she is a master holochess player, and Sid puts her to work running a racket and making money off of people by beating them in holochess. When the Bad Batch returns, Hunter, he's a little put out by this. He doesn't like the idea of her kind of being at the center of a gambling operation, we could say. But when he realizes that she has used the money to pay off their debt with Sid and that she just wanted to help and wanted to do something, he's okay with that, and they reach a new accord. And that's the episode. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very, very fascinating episode. And I love this episode for so many reasons. One of the first things I want to talk about, and this is maybe one of my favorite things that's ever that they do in Star Wars television, but they've done this a lot recently. The Bad Batch don't come in the first scene. The first scene is not the Bad Batch. The first scene has nothing to do with them, or so we think. The first scene is laying the political landscape. It is that scene of Senator Avi Singh talking to his people under the boot of the Empire and making that choice not to bow down to his imperial oppressors. And what I love about it is, again, it's this that sense of disorientation. It's that sense of what's happening here and why do we need to care about this. And immediately and what I love about it is immediately when we draw the Bad Batch into it, we now have stakes. We now care about the characters on the world a bit more. It's not just like the Bad Batch is doing this thing. No, but because we've built the characters that they're helping up as sympathetic before
Yeah.
it reminds me a lot of the introduction to the Mandalorian season 1 episode Sanctuary, the one on Sorgan,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
the first scene is the Raiders like doing one of their raids on Sorgan, so that we have stakes for this village when Mando comes in and does a whole seven samurai thing with them. Like we
Yeah.
have those, we have a reason to care about those people, and I love when Star Wars does that.
Yeah, I was a big fan of the opening scene as well. I really liked it from a world building standpoint. I thought it did a really good job of just showing the changes of the Empire, showing how they operate. Showing Avi Singh kind of being forced to make his choice. The Imperial officer, obviously she's touting cooperation and loyalty. Just wanting Singh to be a mouthpiece. But I really liked it as well. I think it's a great example of what's been talked about a lot, but we don't really get to see it so much. These scenes of what the transition actually looks like on the ground, like you said, for different planets, for different people. And it's really, really kind of shocking. And I think it's a really well done scene. It's shocking and chilling watching the ATTEs, this vehicle that we've kind of used and gotten used to in the Clone Wars as being a symbol of the brave clones, going against the stakes, taking it to the Separatists, liberating planets like Ryloth using ATTEs, and then all of a sudden they're being used to intimidate and corral innocent civilians and to quell uprising. I think it's a great little symbolic moment showing that flip from the Republic to the Empire and showing how the clones are kind of turning that corner and regressing to having no individuality.
Absolutely, and one of the things that also comes with this is that there's this weird sense of, and I like the moral gray lines that it plays on with this. is that, there are all these. We've talked with, I remember the first episode we recorded with Jared the Dark Jedi from the Nerd Academy podcast. We had this huge conversation about, the Separatists are doing the malevolence and the like these crazy tanks, and there was nobody at any moment that are like, are we the bad guys? But it's a weird inversion of that, which is that, the Separatists, like this is a Separatist homeworld, and they're being oppressed by the Empire, and their senator makes a heroic stand, and we have this moment of, are they the good guys in this scenario? Because for 7 seasons, again, with some exceptions, we viewed the Separatists as the bad guys. But again, it's one of those manipulations by Palpatine. We've talked about this time and time again. There's some really fantastic companion pieces to this episode. One of them I recommend if people haven't seen this, and I don't think Jacob has, so I'm not going to spoil it. Episode 3 of Tales of the Jedi, an episode called Choices, takes place on Raxus Secundus and foreshadows a lot of stuff that will eventually happen in the Clone Wars. I'll just say that, and serves as a great companion piece both this episode and Heroes on Both Sides, which, you guessed it, also takes place on Raxus. It does seem like Raxus is the place that Star Wars has decided to have a lot of the conversations about the Separatist Alliance. Makes sense because it's their homeworld.
Makes sense, yeah.
But, and again, we've talked about this many times over, but most of the Separatists aren't bad people. We've seen that, like Senator Singh seems as noble, or maybe and even more noble than a lot of Republic senators.
Yeah, like he's an upstanding guy. He seems really upstanding. He really believes what he believes. He really wants to make a better galaxy, and he sees the way to do that as by escaping the corruption and the stagnation of the Republic.
Fundamentally, let's just ask this question. Fundamentally, what is the difference between Avi Singh and Cham Syndulla? Not much of anything.
Not much. Yeah.
Fundamentally, but because of the labels we put on them, we think of one of them as the good guy and one of them as the bad guy.
Yeah. Well, right after watching this episode, it really made me want to go back and watch certain Clone Wars episodes, because obviously the Clone Wars, it's about the clones. It takes place from their perspective. So it makes sense to focus in on more of the shady and really immoral things that the Separatists did, and what the clones are hearing about, what the clones are experiencing, how they have to kind of, because they're at war, they're kind of forced to they're forced to view the Separatists as just evil and irredeemable, and they're completely at odds with them. But obviously that's not really the case, and it makes me very curious as to what the Clone Wars and some of those key moments would have looked like from a Separatist perspective, and what the Separatist line of thinking and rhetoric would have been. And I think seeing Senator Singh and seeing kind of seeing Echo's kind of reconciliation with Singh and reconciliation, changing what he thinks, it's a massive shift. And I think it's not super explicit in this episode, so it kind of flies under the radar, and I would have liked to see them bring it up explicitly more in this episode.
I was hoping also to see a bit more of them reckoning with what it means that, that Republic soldiers are now rescuing a Separatist senator, and how times have changed so radically. But there's a lot of great subtext in that I think we can explore too. And I was just thinking about going back to the similarities between the Separatists and the Republic. Again, these people are not so different. They're the Separatist senators are dissatisfied with life in the galaxy as normal, and they are and they want to act in the goodwill of their people, but are controlled at the top by greedy corporate interests. And you can also say the exact same thing with the Republic.
Yeah, like you think most of those Republic senators who in some of those Clone Wars episodes, they're voting to like, okay, we're going to deregulate the banks, we're going to nationalize the banks so we can pony up trillions more credits and order more clones and order more equipment. They're not thinking about how it's funneling. They're not thinking, oh, it's going to be safe, we're going to funnel so much money into Kaminoans, we're going to consolidate so much power for the executive branch. They're thinking like, we need to defend the Republic because the way to a better galaxy is through reform in the Republic. It's not
Yeah.
through tearing it apart. And they desperately don't want to tear it apart.
And they don't realize that somebody like Halle Bertoni, who's one of the Kaminoans, who, by the way, was literally named after an oil company that was profiteering off of the Iraq war called Halliburton, which Vice President Dick Cheney worked with.
Dick Cheney made money off the Iraq war. Dick Cheney made money off the Iraq war.
Yeah.
I'll say it again. Dick Cheney made money off the Iraq war.
Yeah. Star Wars is not political except for when it's extremely political.
Which is like all the time.
Which is freaking always.
It can always be political if you want to think about it that way.
Yeah, but you know, what's the difference between Halle Bertoni and Wat Tambor? What's the difference? Not much. They're both trying to get as much money and profits off the war as they possibly can, and they both succeed in very different ways. I mean, Watt's story ends a bit more tragic, but hopefully his buddy Jewel, his reported grandson Jewel, is gonna fix that for him.
Yeah,
and I'm in case you don't know, so the latest arc of the Darth Vader comic is Vader and Sabe, who's working for Vader now, and Ochi, who's also working for Vader, going after. There's apparently an uprising on Skako Minor by this guy named Jewel Tambor, who claims to be the grandson of Wat Tambor.
Wow.
And, you know, Vader slaughtered Tambor on Mustafar, along with the other Separatist leaders. I just find that really fascinating. I'm so excited to read, because Greg Pak's been killing it with this stuff, and I'm so excited to see what.
Yeah, that sounds very cool. I'm not very caught up with the comics, but that sounds very cool. But I guess we can say he won't be turning down for Wat anytime soon.
He will not be turning down
unfortunately.
He will not be turning down for Wat. That guy was brutally stabbed on Mustafar. So, but yeah, let's get into this episode. We've already talked a lot about the opening. One of the things I love is Alexander Siddig, who's the guy who voices Senator Singh. I think that I think that Siddig gets a really great nuanced performance as Siddig as Senator Singh, and I think he makes the character extremely nuanced, which I think is what we needed from this episode. Because again, it's easy to portray the good guys as all good and the bad guys as all bad. It's really easy, and Star Wars often does that, but it's not always the truth. And often there are people who think they're good who are fighting for evil.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that's what we see here is this huge reset from the divisions and the divisions and the dividing lines of the Clone Wars, and now everyone's getting reshuffled. All of a sudden, it doesn't matter if you're a Republican, if you're a Separatist, and it's a big, I think, Eli, to go back to one of your favorite catchphrases, it's a big adapt with the present or die with the past.
Absolutely.
Moment here that the clones are forced to realize, like, nothing that happened in these past 3 years matters anymore. Like, we're working with Separatists, we're working with droids. For some reason, they had a huge problem with working with the protocol droid, which I didn't quite understand that. This is like the Republic had protocol droids too. Like, I don't really.
Yeah, maybe it was something about the model of protocol droid.
Like, yeah, maybe
they had something against RA7s. I don't know.
It's the same model of protocol droid where Ahsoka smashes one in the face in the Clone Wars movie, right?
Yeah, and if you recall, that was a Separatist droid. So yeah, maybe no, and absolutely along that theme of like the adapt with the present or die with the past is, you know, the Bad Batch are in a tight corner surrounded by those clones, and then Avi Singh throws that vase that he was given as a gift at one of the clones. Like, that is absolutely, like, it's an extremely goofy moment, but like, it is absolutely that idea that, like, you know, that was a ceremonial thing that he was given as a diplomatic gift as a senator of from Raxus, and that does not matter anymore because, you know, because his status, his previous lifestyle is all gone, and it's not about any of that ceremonial stuff. It's about living to fight another day, as Hunter says to him.
I also
And
like when he was just like, nah, I didn't like that phase anyway.
yeah,
What did he say? I never much cared for that or something. I don't know. He said it
yeah,
in this very kind of
something like that.
formal
Yeah,
way, but like
yeah.
that was pretty funny. That was
Um,
pretty good.
yeah, and yeah, and I also just like I actually really like, and I wish Echo's role in this episode was a bit emphasized, and I would have loved to see a conversation between Echo and Senator Singh, because Senator Singh was fighting for what he believed in. You know, he was allied with the Separatists because he believed in the cause. But
Yeah.
Echo has a much more personal relationship with the like personal reason for hating the Separatists than all the clones were programmed to. But Echo has experienced the Separatist brutality firsthand.
Yeah. He like was literally in this machine,
E-
like in
e-
this techno union torture chamber
yeah, the Separatists
for like a year.
literally ruined his life
Yeah.
for a quite an extensive period of time.
That's why I
And
wish that Echo had gotten a little more airtime in this episode so we
yeah,
could
me
see
too.
a lot, like you said, a lot of what was subtext. I think the episode could have benefited from it being a little bit more out in the open just because of what we know of what we know of what happened to him, obviously. Like I think it would have been cool to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And I love that we get a little bit of that Echo sass
Oh yeah.
in this episode, but I wish we could have gotten a little bit more of that. I also just really love the action in this episode. The action of them escaping from the palace, I thought was really well executed. Hunter forgetting that Omega's not with them is
That's such a great moment too.
it's such a
Like
great
after what
beat.
happens,
It's such a great beat.
it's yeah, I think that absolutely. I mean, that can lead us into talking about Omega in this episode. We see this dynamic again where, she wants to be part of the team. But I think Hunter in this kind of he regresses a little bit where he had been learning to let her take more responsibility and let her contribute in all the ways that she and only she can contribute to the Bad Batch. But I think I don't think this is necessarily driven anymore by his worry about Omega's ability to take care of herself. I mean, it is to some extent, but more so, I think maybe for him the guilt of letting her get captured and
Yeah,
almost
I
losing her to Bane.
yeah, I think this is about what happened in Bounty Lost. I think this is and in Reunion, like she gets captured in Reunion. Yeah, I think this is. I think Hunter sees her like he isn't strong enough to protect her from Cad Bane, and he's like, okay, I can't do this again. Like I need a little bit more time for before I let this kid get out in the open again.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and we see
Absolutely.
and we see again like Omega actually does impact the crew in a positive way in this episode, but again we see he is getting used to having her on missions. They are getting used to having her as part of the crew,
Yeah.
and she is an important part of the crew. And she and we'll get to this in Rescue on Ryloth, but basically Hera is rescued and Cham and Eleni are rescued because of Omega. That's basically because of her.
Yeah.
And absolutely the batch helps. Absolutely a lot of the Hera helps. Absolutely a lot of the, but like it's really Omega's plan, and it's really Omega's execution of the plan that works. And she is as valuable of a member of the team as any of the other four. That's just true.
Yeah.
And
Unequivocally. Absolutely.
and again, she does play that role in that B plot of like, oh, I'm gonna play Jedrick and absolutely destroy everybody.
Yeah.
And I remember Hunter like even being a bit annoyed because like, oh, you were supposed to keep a low profile. Again, I think he wants
Yeah.
what he wants. Like he's scared of losing her again.
Yeah. He's scared
Um,
of losing her. He doesn't want her to get into some trouble that she
yeah,
can't
yeah,
get her way out of. But
yeah.
I think ultimately, like it's her way of contributing when she's not necessarily like a soldier the way
Yeah,
that they are. She can still do things. She can still contribute. Obviously, everyone, contributes to their families and their communities differently. So I think this is a perfect example of that. I love it as a moment.
Absolutely. It's
Also, it's very interesting to see her just become an absolute whiz at a hollow chest. I'm
yeah,
wondering where that came from.
absolutely.
Wondering what that means.
There's a lot of skills that Omega has that we haven't really followed up on. Again, her being able to shoot the blaster out of Crosshair's hand after never picking up a blaster. This
Yeah,
unexplained, like, there's something going on here. I wonder what it is. But yeah, again, I'm it's the two plots of this episode work very well together. And I was just gonna say, like, the action, I think, on Raxus, like, works really well. Action on Raxus, especially with Wrecker literally getting on that Republic tank and literally pushing it out of, like, pushing the turret out of the way of their tank. Like, that very
yeah.
much reminded me of him pulling the crashed carrier off of Cody in that original Bad Batch episode on Anaxes in the
Oh
Clone
yeah,
Wars.
absolutely.
Like, this is that classic Bad Batch accent, and I really love that. I really do.
Yeah.
Um,
To be honest, I wasn't as much of a fan of the kind of that whole extended rescue and escape sequence. I thought the concept of the ATTE chase was cool. That was a very interesting moment, especially when we see the clones like firing on their own men and firing on their own
Machines.
tank. Yeah, like machines, like just to accomplish the goal with no thought of they don't think like no thought of each other as brothers anymore, but simply being programmed
Yeah.
to accomplish the goal as efficiently as possible for the
And
empire.
and there's that, like, again, there's that sneaky thing that sneaks by you this episode, but the Bad Batch are fighting people who literally have the same DNA with them, with their sworn enemy.
Yeah,
Like, what? How did it get to that? How the hell did they get to fighting with their sworn enemy against people with literally the same DNA?
that's what the empire does. That's what the
And
empire does to
that
people.
is absolutely what the Empire does, and it is just crazy to see that just happen. There's that line also from this episode. There's that line that I think I forget who it is. I think it might have been Wrecker, but I think it was probably Hunter. But I always thought we'd make it to Raxus someday, but not like this.
Yeah, that's a great line. That is a great
Yeah.
line. I love that line.
And it's, again, it comes down to that question of who really won the Clone Wars, and that realization that nobody won because nobody was supposed to win.
The
And
empire won.
or in Ezra's cheesy way of saying it, the Empire won the Clone Wars.
Well, I don't think that's cheesy at all. I think it's accurate.
It
I think it's
is, but,
completely
like,
accurate to say.
it absolutely is, but it's also like the Empire won, as in, like they were the strongest force surviving at the end of it, but they
Yeah,
never played a part in the Clone Wars in that way. Like, they
yeah,
basically, like, the Republic technically won, but
yeah,
the Republic became the Empire so shortly after that it looked like the
yeah.
Empire won.
Well, the Republic as a military, in a
Yeah,
strictly military sense, they won, even though the entire thing was
yeah,
very orchestrated.
yeah.
But
It was completely
the
staged. That's the
the
thing.
Republic, as a political entity,
Yeah.
absolutely did not win.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah.
In no
No.
sense did they win. Of
Yeah.
course, I think
But
goes without saying.
and speaking of that episode, again, that this would, like, we should do a theme between themes with these sometimes. But
Oh yeah.
if we could do choices, we could do choices from Tales of the Jedi, heroes on both sides from the Clone Wars, Common Ground, and then the last battle from Star Wars Rebels. Like, that is the ups and downs of the Separatist Alliance. That right
Oh
there
yeah.
is the entire arc of the Separatist Alliance in four
Absolutely.
in about, like, let's see, what's that, like, it'll be like 70 minutes. In just over an hour, we can see the entire rise and fall of the Separatist Alliance, and their entire, like, like, their ideas, their core statements, their reasons for fighting, how and for what reasons they fought for in just over an hour. This episode works so well with Tales, with that episode of Tales, with that episode of Clone Wars, with that episode of Rebels. It's almost like they were all made under the supervision of the same people.
Man, it seems like I really have to catch up on Tales. I've been falling way behind, but I gotta catch up. Yeah.
And like I gotta say, like Tales, like that is one of my least favorite of the shorts of Tales, but even that
Hmm.
like has some really interesting points. And yeah, absolutely, Tales it's fantastic. I love it so much. By the way, you know who the main Jedi on Raxus is on in that episode of Tales?
Who is it?
It's Dooku.
Ooh, oh, that's sick. I'm so looking
because
forward to seeing Jedi
because
Dooku. I've
because
wanted to see that for
remember
the longest time.
because remember who starts the Separatist movement on Raxus? That would be Dooku. So we get to see him go there as a Jedi before like the Separatist crisis happens, before like the Separatist idea even happens, as a Jedi to deal with unrest on the planet. It's one of those great symbolic nods, I guess you could say. But I won't tell you too much more about it. But yeah, I love that. Let's see.
Yeah.
You got
Um,
anything else for this episode, or should we go on to the Devil's Deal and the rescue on
no, I think we
Ryloth?
covered it. I think. What do you
Okay.
think? I mean, overall about this episode, I have some thoughts. I thought it was, solid yet unremarkable episode. I think you liked it. I think you liked it a bit more than I did. Obviously, it had some great moments for Omega and Hunter in the batch. Serviceable storyline, but I think, like many Bad Batch episodes, I think it's solid, but it's nothing out of this world. But you really just have to take it. You have to take it with the other episodes surrounding it to really get the most out of it. Um,
Absolutely. There's this. I like the idea that what I love about most about this episode, and again, it's all about all three of these episodes, is they're painting the picture of what the galaxy looks like after the Empire, and how different and yet similar the responses are. I get that specifically with the episode. I wish some of the subtext could have actually been the text, but I get that they had the specific story to tell.
yeah, I think that for an episode called Common Ground, whose description Disney Plus says the Bad Batch has their identity challenged, I would have liked to see way more of that
Of
kind
their
of out,
identity actually
yeah,
challenged.
of that out in the open and them really working through that and us really getting to see that because I think that would have been absolutely amazing to see. Right now, we just kind of see they aren't all that happy about it, but then they do a bunch of fighting, and then all of a sudden they're like, okay, yeah, we're boys now with this
Yeah, we're we're
separatist
we're, we're
senator.
friends now.
We're bros with the separatist senator that we were complaining about having to rescue 15 minutes earlier in the episode. But I will say, for I think this was maybe my least favorite, possibly my least favorite episode of the Bad Batch so far. But
Thing.
if this is the floor for the Bad Batch, if an episode with this much still for all I didn't like about it, for the fact that I didn't really care for the action, I thought it was a bit ponderous. I thought it didn't have enough urgency or stakes for me personally. If that is the floor, an episode with this much meaty character exploration still and that much poignancy, if that's the floor, then I'm really, really loving this on the rewatch.
Yeah. Oh,
And I'm
absolutely.
really like my like estimation and esteem for the Bad Batch has just gone up so high from the first time I
Absolutely.
watched it.
For me, my least favorite so far. I mean, you probably never guessed this, but it was Cornered. But like even so, if that's the floor, if Cornered is the floor, like it doesn't have the most thematic like relevance to anything, but like just the meatiness of seeing all that great action on Pantora and like the great animation, like if that's the floor, then I'm thrilled. And if we only really like again, there are only two episodes of this show in this season that I can say that I'm honestly feeling about. And we've covered one of them and we'll cover another one of them next episode. Out of 16, if two of them I'm feeling about, and the other 14, I'm like, yeah, these are great. That's a very strong season right there.
Absolutely, yeah.
That is
Absolutely.
that
I
is a
think
stronger slate than like if we're comparing it the 16 episodes to 16 episodes, the Bad Batch arguably has a stronger slate than like a more consistent slate than the Mandalorian does.
yeah, I think
Not stronger, more consistent because I think the Mandalorian
yeah.
actually reaches higher highs, but I think it has lower lows as well.
Yeah, I think what makes the Bad Batch so unique and so enjoyable in this rewatch is that if we're talking about the main kind of character development and all the character work that they do with Hunter and Omega and the rest of the batch, they do that work and they put in these moments every single episode after episode. And in the other shows, kind of the personal things, the big kind of moments of vulnerability, and the some of the themes and the through lines, they kind of they fade in and out, they come and go. They really fade in and out in the Clone Wars. They're a little more consistent in Rebels. They're there, but not as consistently in the live action shows, I think. But they really are here episode after episode after episode in the Bad Batch. And that consistency of just working through something, it doesn't have to be huge, but working through something that's like really profoundly important for the characters and their development, just doing that every single episode, I think, is really powerful. And it really allows the show to cover a lot of ground and really reach some amazing moments.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to move on to the Ryloth arc, as I'm calling
Let's
it?
do it. Let's do it.
I'm gonna summarize them like kind of together because I feel like that's kind of how they should work, honestly.
Yeah, there you really
Yeah.
have to take them.
In Devil's Deal and Rescue on Ryloth, or as I call them, the Ryloth soap opera, we start on Ryloth, where the Empire is imposing their will on the Twi'leks, and we're seeing again the cracks form in the relationship that was once stable for the common good of beloved freedom fighter Cham Syndulla and longtime Senator Orn Free Taa on Ryloth. Vice Admiral Rampart is partially in charge of the Imperial occupation on Ryloth, and we find out so is Crosshair and his troops as well. They've been put on assignment on Ryloth to watch over stuff, and we quickly find out that again Cham has much more of a sway on the people than of Ryloth than Senator Taa does, and Cham initially embraces the Empire because he wants the next generation to have peace and to have a life filled with peace, as opposed to the conflict of his generation. But things aren't all fantastic on Ryloth because his main deputy, Gobi Glee, who we saw in the Clone Wars, we learned that Gobi Glee is less happy with Imperial occupation, and the Empire has required the Twi'leks to give up most of their weapons, but he has been trying to smuggle arms onto Ryloth for protection's sake, and that gets him in some hot water with the Empire. We also see Cham and Eleni's young daughter, Hera, voiced by the incomparable Vanessa Marshall, and her droid C-110P, also known as Chopper, spying on some Imperial refinery on Ryloth for Gobi, and she eventually gets caught by the Empire, and Cham has to smooth things over with his clone trooper Howzer, who worked with him during the Clone Wars and is now and has a personal relationship with Cham. But eventually, Gobi manages to lure Hera off of Ryloth onto a nearby moon to pick up arms sent by who else but the Bad Batch, sent by Sid. And they give them the arms, and Omega and Hera form a bond. But then they fly down back to Ryloth. The Empire tracks them. Crosshair planned to track her on their ship as it was leaving Ryloth, and they capture all of them for illegally exporting arms to Ryloth, including Hera. And eventually, Cham and Eleni come to the rescue, and they try to get their daughter back, and they're successful in rescuing their daughter, but they're eventually all rounded up by the Empire, and then they're framed in they're framed in the shooting of Senator Taa, who was actually shot by Crosshair, but it's made to look like he was shot by Cham, so that they can implicate them and jail Cham and Eleni. But Hera ends up escaping with Chopper. In Rescue on Ryloth, she manages to send a message to the Bad Batch and Omega, who they met, saying, "Hey, you really need to come rescue my parents. This is getting bad." And they eventually make the tough decision to come back and rescue the Syndullas from the Empire, which they do amongst a very complicated mission, and they're saved at the last second by a Howzer, who gains a conscience of his own during the struggle, and he says, "No, I will not move against the people who I was friendly with." who I protected once upon a time just because some empirical force wants me to, and he buys the Syndullas enough time to escape, and they do, but not before regretting that they would really have loved to stay on Ryloth and help their people, but that they're now entering the larger fight against the Empire as well. And that is the Ryloth arc in very broad strokes. Yeah, and you want to get into it now?
Yeah, let's do it.
I love. I'll just say this, and I already referred to this as this, but I freaking love the I freaking love the Ryloth soap opera, as I call it. Like, it really is the like, I feel like we were catching up with the Syndullas. Like, we'd seen them. We were really filling in these gaps. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I love the opening scene. I think it's eerily similar to the one on Raxus, and for good reason. Obviously, from a world building perspective, the same strategy as last time. Just going to show, it doesn't matter if you were fighting for the Republic or if you're fighting for the Separatists. It doesn't matter if you're Ryloth, the planet that went through crazy, unimaginable suffering in fighting alongside the Republic and trying to fight for their freedom. It doesn't matter. You're gonna get subjugated all the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also really I really like the opening scene a lot as well. I like that Ta, like that the people are able to see Ta as who he really is, as somebody who doesn't care about Ryloth and who just cares about the power, but
Yeah.
thinks otherwise.
Yeah, I think Ta, he is willing to, obviously, it's called Devil's Deal. He's willing to cut any deal with the Empire, throw his people under the bus as much as he can in order to preserve what he can of his own power and his own, like, comfortable, wealthy lifestyle. And it's nothing more than a continuation of what we've seen in the Clone Wars. And I think it was really cool that we got to see Cham kind of confront Orn Free Taa once and for all.
Yeah. I want to address a complaint I've heard about this episode, and I think is kind of dumb, honestly, if I can say so. I know there are a lot of people who can't stand Devil's Deal because the Bad Batch only appear for one scene in the episode. And the argument, this is their show, and why aren't they appearing more in their own show? And I will just say, catch me giving a fuck about that, because I don't. Again, this show is a spin-off of a spin-off. It is that, like the Clone Wars is a spin-off of the movies, and this is a spin-off of the Clone Wars. And we are getting involved in this bigger universe, and the Empire's rise has a big consequence on this big universe. And this episode matters quite a bit to the Bad Batch story, obviously, but it matters even more to the larger tapestry. Alden Diaz, you're welcome. Of the Star Wars galaxy as a whole. Like again, this is a small puzzle piece in the Batch's story, but a big puzzle piece in the galactic story of what's happening generally with the galaxy right now. And it's why I'm not as sympathetic to people who talk about that here. It's why I'm not as sympathetic to people who complain about the fifth and sixth episodes of the Book of Boba Fett having only one scene of Boba Fett. I understand. I do want more development of Boba Fett as a character, and I hope we get a season 2 to get to more develop Boba as a character. But also, those two episodes, Return to the Mandalorian and From the Desert Comes a Stranger, are essential for the grander story, the larger story of what's happening at that point. Star Wars is absolutely they are a bunch of different stories that happen to be in the same universe, but they're also a shared universe. They're also a collective universe. They also interact with each other and play off of each other in interesting ways. And sometimes that's just thematic, but sometimes that is through the timeline. And I think that's one of the extraordinary things about this universe, is that we can have things that directly impact each other, and we can see them from multiple people's perspectives.
Yeah, and for Devil's Deal and Rescue on Ryloth, to me, it's also like, you're mad that the Bad Batch didn't show up that much in Devil's Deal, but did you watch Rescue on Ryloth then? Like, I think it pays off brilliantly. I think it's
It
absolutely worth it,
absolutely.
even if you are an extreme purist and can't stand to have an episode without them as the main focus, unless you just really maybe just really didn't like Rescue on Ryloth. I don't know.
Yeah. My
Although I
thing.
think it's hard not to like that episode, but
Yeah,
that's
I
my
I
opinion.
remember I remember a lot of people complaining about Devil's Deal before Rescue and Ryloth was out, and I understand that there's a lot of there were a lot of complaints generally about like how cameo focused this show was, and how focused on like other characters in the Bad Batch it is, and to a certain extent I understand where they're coming from because there are a lot of familiar characters in the show, but it is a spinoff of a spinoff. A, what do you expect? And B, again, we're not just telling the story of the Bad Batch in this. We're this story. It's again about that idea of this story being bigger than its name, and
Yeah,
all Star Wars stories, in a sense, are bigger than their name, and that's my kind of defense of that in that area, and I just wanted to get that out of there because I'm sure it would have come up one way or another.
yeah. Fair
Um,
enough. I think also this is a prime example of why, television, TV shows, you really can't, or I mean, you can, and we do, but you can't always dissect and analyze and evaluate a show piece by piece because it's a continuous story. And I think this is a prime example of, yeah, if you look at this episode like in a vacuum, like sure it's not the greatest, but it and even Devil's Deal and even Common Ground before it are really improved, I think, if you watch them in conjunction with Rescue on Ryloth.
Absolutely, I think that we can view and we must view Star Wars as two different things at the same time. They're all standalone, but they're also all parts of a whole. And some of them work better for one than they do the other. And it's not all symmetrical like that. You know what I mean? Like there's not some that work better. There's some that only work as parts of a whole, and some that only work as standalones. It's a complete balance, and we see all sorts of places on the spectrum. And I'm hoping that as this stuff becomes more common, because again, with the Mando verse, as I guess you could call it, with the collection of stories around the Mandalorian, be that being Mando, Book of Boba Fett, and soon it's going to be Ahsoka and Skeleton Crew. Jon Favreau has been very, very, very open, and he said this with the Mandalorian season 2 before the Book of Boba Fett was even announced, that he wants, but like Ahsoka was announced at that point, and I think Skeleton Crew was also announced at that point, if I'm not mistaken. That he wanted he was very inspired by the intertwining storylines of Game of Thrones, and he wanted to do a little bit of that with Star Wars, to connect all of these different storylines from different shows and have them impact each other in these different ways. And I think
Interesting.
it's a really ambitious idea, and I think that he and Dave are two of the best people to carry out that vision. And that's why I think I get so frustrated when people are like, "Why are they not focusing? Like, why are they doing all these like crazy complicated storylines that connect with each other?" I'm like, they literally told you they were going to do that. Like it or
Yeah.
not, they told you they were going to do it.
Yeah, I think whether or not they tell you that they're going to do it, that may not change. That doesn't necessarily change the impact. And I think if you disagree with that choice,
Yeah,
if you don't like that choice, then I don't think it matters. And if you don't
yeah,
like
I
the
get.
effect that it has, I don't necessarily think it matters too much whether they say, "Oh, this is our intent."
Yeah,
Like the
I get.
impact is all the same,
I
to be
guess
fair.
my point wasn't like, oh, you have to like this, and you don't like what you like, just like what you dislike, but like it's one of those things where people accuse them of doing things they literally said in advance they were going to do, which, like, again, like it dislike it, that just doesn't make sense. But I'm really excited. I like the intertwining, I like the connected universe. I really love that aspect of Star Wars. But let's enough about that. Let's actually talk about Ryloth. And my god, there's so much great stuff. I want to talk about, I think, maybe the star of this arc, really. Eleni Syndulla. For a long
Yeah.
time, we knew that Cham had a daughter, Hera. She would show up as a major player in Star Wars Rebels, and we knew that her mother died in the resistance movements on Ryloth. And we have finally now seen the absolute queen that is Eleni Syndulla. Like, I, I love her. She's fantastic. She's exactly what she needs to be. She's exactly the badass I want her to be.
Yeah, she has some amazing one-liners.
Yeah, she's great. Like
What is she?
Star Wars has like a recent history of really badass moms, and I really love that trope, and I hope that carries on. And Farrell the Young, I looked up, is the woman who voice acts her, and she does a fantastic job.
Yeah, she does a fantastic job, I think. Yeah, Eleni in these couple of episodes, I think she's super compelling. She's really fun, incredibly easy to root for. Just a great character, and I hope we can see more of her at some point. I would like that.
Absolutely, I love that. My favorite thing that happens at the beginning of this episode is that after Hera is captured and taken back to the Syndulla house, she goes, Hera, what were you doing at the refinery? And she was like, I never said I have the was at the refinery. And she was like, I have eyes everywhere. Don't worry, I know exactly where you were. And then as she was exploring her way, she was like, okay, what do they have over there?
Yeah. I guess she
That's
was
my
like,
favorite part.
yeah, she's
What's the
like,
dirt?
don't do that. Don't do that again, but also tell me everything.
Yeah. It's fantastic. I love that so much. And I also love Robin Atkindown's portrayal of Champ specifically in these two episodes because this is like if we had to say one of these things is not like the other for Clone Wars Cham, Bad Batch Cham, and Rebels Cham, I would say that the outlier is Bad Batch Cham.
Oh, absolutely. I think that there's a whole conversation. There's a conversation to be had about Cham and the changes that he's experiencing, in that first scene and just throughout the episode, both these episodes, you can see the pain and conflict in him so much. The Empire, they're taking advantage of the war, they're taking advantage of the exhaustion in the galaxy and on these planets in order to take them over. And Cham is willing to look past, he's willing to look the other way over some of the bad things that he doesn't like about the Empire because he's convinced that he can't make people fight anymore or that he can't conscience doing it and that he wants to give Hera a better life in which she doesn't have to fight. And he says as much. He says like, I don't want you to have to fight the way that I did.
Here's what I was going to say about Cham, actually. This is what I was going to say about Cham. There are a lot of interesting parallels that I've drawn myself between Cham and Saw. Cham and Saw. But this is one interesting way they differ because, again, we see them both in Clone Wars, Bad Batch, Rebels. But let's think about it this way, okay? Cham, actually, Saw is the revolutionary freedom fighter in Clone Wars, in Bad Batch, and in Rebels.
Yeah.
He stays the course the entire time, whereas
Yes.
Cham does not. Cham, again, I think Cham is a better leader than Saw is generally because he wants to get to the place where his children and his children's generation will have that better life. Whereas Saw, I feel like, just is a little too laser focused on bringing down tyranny and not what happens after that.
Yeah. Agreed.
And what I find interesting about that is that Cham sees this veiled peace and he wants to accept it. He really does. He wants to accept it. Saw doesn't accept the Empire. Cham can't. And there's a big difference between the two of those. It's not really a question about Saw. Like Saw sees what the Republic is becoming very quickly, and aftermath takes place like hours and days after Sith. And we already see that Saw's building up, forces on Onderon, but presumably this arc is weeks and weeks after Revenge of the Sith, and Cham is trying to accept the peace, and only at the very end of this arc that he realized that he really can't accept it. And I think that's a really interesting idea about Cham, because again, it's just like the last episode has a lot of great pairings. I think this arc has a lot of great pairings, specifically with the Rebels episode Homecoming, especially because I feel like Hera does a role reversal with her father from Devil's Deal to Homecoming, because it feels like Hera is the one more concerned with like the big picture, like not the big picture, but like Hera's more concerned with the Empire and it's impacting Ryloth and we got to get them out of here, whereas Cham is more focused on the big picture and Ryloth, and he doesn't want the people to suffer anymore and blah blah blah. Whereas in Homecoming, it's the exact opposite, where Cham is like, we got to get the Empire off of Ryloth, and we got to do anything we can to get the Empire off of Ryloth. And Hera's like, no, look, the Empire's bad, but it's affecting everybody everywhere. We see Hera in that episode slip back into the French accent she uses for a lot of this episode. I want to help everyone. It's
great moment.
It's an interesting role reversal from these two episodes, and it brings me to that line. My hope is that you won't ever have to live a life like mine.
Yeah, that's the line I was talking about. That's the line I was talking about.
And I love that line because it is partially true. Like it partially comes true and it partially is not true. Because in the literal sense, Hera does have to lead a life like Cham, fighting for freedom. But she does avoid a lot of the mistakes that her father does in leadership.
Oh, absolutely.
So it is an absolute, in many ways it comes true, and in many ways it doesn't.
Yeah. And I think that it gets to the heart of why this Cham that we see is so different from the Cham that we see in Rebels and the Cham that we see in the Clone Wars, is that he being responsible for the Ryloth freedom fighters and kind of carrying the weight of Ryloth on his shoulders for so long. He's just desperate. He's desperate for peace, and he's willing to seriously compromise his morals to do that. And then we see him kind of walk that back and realize, with the help of Golby and Eleni and everyone, realizing that it's not the right path. But I think his war weariness is just, clouding his judgment. Even when Golby says to him, like, these clones, they were supposed to leave. Now they're becoming occupiers. Even though Cham himself, I can't remember which episode it is, but Cham himself in one of the Clone Wars episodes on Ryloth, he's extremely, extremely reluctant and reticent to work with the clones because he doesn't want Ryloth to be occupied. And yet here he is a couple of short years later saying the exact opposite. I think that just shows what a toll it's taken on him.
Yeah. And I think that, you talk about Devil's Deal with Taa making it with the Empire. And I absolutely think that's the deal with that is what the title is referencing. But it could also be referring to Cham. And he doesn't make both? The Devil. No, like that's what I'm saying. I think it refers to both. I think it does refer to both. Yeah. I think that Cham, I don't think Cham makes the deal with the devil, but he comes very, very close to. And again, it's that quintessential, that great line that great back and forth between Cham and Eleni in the middle of this episode. Don't lose sight in what we're trying to achieve. I am questioning the cost to achieve it. What do you want and what are you willing to do to get it? That is quintessential Star Wars. That is like Star Wars at its true essence is that underlying question, and we come back to it again and again and again, and here it is yet again. What is too big of a price to pay for peace? Yeah. What is too big of a price to pay for freedom?
Yeah, and I think that that's something that in these episodes both, we talk about, anyway, we have to get to this at some point, but both Cham wants Hera to kind of stay out of the fray, stay out of the action, have a different life, very similar to what Hunter wants for Omega a lot of the time. And, similarly, they both are kind of questioning and reckoning. And to some extent, it's already been resolved for Hunter, or it's continuing to be resolved, but they have to question and reckon with how much kind of inaction, how much of our morals do we want to compromise? How much do we want to let slide that we know really, really we shouldn't or we wouldn't want to? How much are we going to let slide in order to, preserve the life that we want for those who depend on us?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that brings us to another question, which is obviously what they both want as fathers, or I guess caretakers, father figures in Hunter's case. They have these people, the kids who depend on them, but then they also have more people than that who depend on them. And we see that in Rescue on Ryloth, with Omega kind of being the moral compass and convincing Hunter to go back and rescue the Syndullas.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that again, this is very much explored in Rescue, and we'll get to that when we'll get to that. But what I love about specifically about Rescue and about this episode is, again, it is the biggest thing that Cham needs to be reminded is he wants the peace and freedom for who? He wants it for his children. He wants it for Hera. And who leads the fight against the Empire in Rescue and Ryloth? It's the
Hera.
kids. It's the kids. It's Omega and Hera. It's the ones who, like, again, the children are our future is another incredibly important theme for Star Wars. It just is. Who are we doing this for? It's for the people who will come after us.
Yeah.
And it is
yeah.
And Star Wars has laid that out very clearly. It's always about the next generation. It's always about the people who come after us.
Yeah.
Relating back to Weird World for a second, that's why I'm so glad that 2022 had a record voting turnout for people under the age of 30. Because again, it's our Earth that we're inheriting. It's our society that we're inheriting. We are the future, and we're trying to create the world that we want to live in.
Star Wars is political.
Star Wars is freaking political. Like again, Halliburton. Let's be real. Newt Gunray,
Newt Gunray. Yeah, I was gonna say
Ronald Reagan. I'm trying to like freaking even Hux's speech, like Hux's speech in The Force Awakens, is a neo-Nazi speech. That's what it is. Like,
I mean, I think that's even a little too heavy-handed. Like, they're just saying, look, it's a space Nazi. And we've known for 40 years. We've known. It's not new. You don't have to.
It's a space Nazi, and then Hux absolutely like that's one of my favorite things about the sequel trilogy is Hux absolutely gets slapped around the next two movies, because Nazis are bad. That's what Star Wars is trying to say. Nazis are bad. Like this guy is scary, but remember that he is. That he needs to be removed of all of his power because Nazis are bad.
Don't be fooled by the cool outfits. He's not a good dude.
Yeah, and again with Andor, that's what we're seeing again.
Yeah,
we'll see this, and again I won't spoil it too much for you, but we see this with Dedra Meero, where we are rooting for her because of the sexism that she faces within the Empire, but then we see her like torturing Bix, not like 20 minutes later, and again we can root for her and she can still be a fascist. Like both of those can still like happen at the same time. The story can make us root for her and she can still be an awful person.
Yeah, well, how much are you really rooting for her in that case? I guess I can weigh in on that.
You will see, but very much like she is trying to like she is on the right track. She's one of the smarter people in the Empire, and she's on the right track with stuff. And like a lot of adults who don't know better are trying to order her around, and she kind of becomes an underdog. And again, I'm not saying that I agree with anything she's doing. I don't. But the show gets you to root for her. That's just true. And yeah, but we see all this stuff. We see a lot through the Empire's eyes, and they're often portrayed as the protagonist sometimes. That does not make them good.
Yeah, well, you don't have to be good to be the protagonist of your own story.
Absolutely.
No one does.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Least
But
of all in Star Wars.
least of all
Actually,
in Star
maybe
Wars.
not least of all, but
Yeah.
you know, it's entering a new era. We have been for Star Wars of a lot of moral ambiguity and shades of gray throughout. You know, with people like the Mandalorian, where you're like, yeah, I love this guy. Go, go with your space baby Yoda son. And he like brutally murders four people, like completely accessible, and you're just like, oof, oh boy, that was a lot. you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
But to bring it back for a minute before we hop over, I think we can segue through relatively smoothly to Rescue on Ryloth because, like we both said, they work better in tandem.
Yeah.
I did like the one Bad Batch scene that was in this episode, you know, because in previous episodes, I can't remember which one exactly, but they had that whole conversation about whether or not, you know, they wanted to become arms dealers, and we talked a lot about what their path forward would be in that conflict. And even though it seemed to have been resolved towards, you know, we need to kind of start sticking our necks out a little bit more to use an Ezra Bridgerism, they do turn into arms dealers.
They do, but again, look at the
Yeah.
causes they're doing it for. Like again, they're freeing a Separatist senator. They're helping the Ryloth resistance movement. Before they
Yeah.
were delivering Rancors to Jabba the Hutt,
Yeah.
and
That's an upgrade.
like that is
So
a definite upgrade. I think it's a coincidence that they're getting these like I think it's a plot wise coincidence that they're getting these more noble orders now, but I think thematically it is absolutely not a coincidence.
because my question then, what the episode kind of leaves to the imagination and to ponder is, you know, it's going towards a good cause, but knowing Sid, did Sid know that? Did the Bad Batch know that? Did she relay that? Like knowing Sid, where she seems to kind of, to me at least, Sid gets a little bit, she gets a little bit more slimy and brazenly exploitative each and every episode that goes by. So it's hard for me to imagine that, you know, she would be carefully, obviously she's not carefully vetting or background checking, you know, these missions. So it's a little interesting how they're moving forwards and also moving backwards at the same time.
Absolutely, yeah.
Maybe not backwards, but
I don't think backwards, but I think that I think that they're improving in a lot of ways, but they're also not. I don't think it's going to be a straight line for them.
absolutely not. Yeah, that'd be boring if it was a
Yeah,
straight line, quite frankly.
yeah,
I also
yeah.
love one more thing. I love the one scene of Omega touring Hera around the ship. I think
In classic.
it's such a good little moment. But it just shows how much she's grown, you know, the confidence, the experience, the sophistication that she exudes during that scene, just compared to the beginning of the show, you know. It
Sorry,
sneaks
I
up
just
on you, but then all of a sudden you're like, wow, this is a different person than the one that first showed up on Camino said, "Hi, I'm Omega."
yeah, absolutely. There are a couple of things I want to talk about with that. That scene with the Bad Batch and Hera is fantastic, and one of the and there's that classic line, and I love this line. I think it's my favorite line from any of these three episodes, honestly. In this part of Devil's Deal, flying, it's about a feeling.
Great
Classic,
line.
love it.
Classic.
No notes. And what I love specifically about it is that it is, I feel like it is the show's luminous beings are we, not this crude matter.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we've talked a lot, and this is mentioned in Rebels too. And I love this idea. The Force is in everybody, whether you're sensitive to it or not. The Force is in everybody. If you open yourself up to it, if you find balance in yourself, then you can interact with the Force. You might not be able to lift things with it or influence people's minds with it, but everybody is connected with the Force if they so choose to be in their own separate, different ways. And I like to think this is Hera's way. Like she's talking about specs don't mean anything. It's just you up there. It's specs are only half of it. Like I feel like this is how Hera connects with the what's above her in the galaxy. The harmonic balance of the galaxy, and I love that idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone has
Again,
their own
Hera
way.
is not force sensitive, but she
Yeah.
connects into the energy field that is the force through flying.
Yeah, like everyone has their own way of connecting in, if they're not, even if they're not force sensitive, maybe for Han Solo, that's flying, maybe for the Aqualish truck driver in one of the previous episodes,
That's his sick
that's
beats.
listening to his sick beats on his sick headphones while
Yeah.
he drives his sick truck. I don't know. I'm just
Yeah,
throwing
they have
out
a
a
habit for doing it with pilots, but I think it can do other things. Like again, I think that I think it's absolutely and like in Tatooine Rhapsody, I think that what's his name, Jay,
yeah,
connects through the
it's
Force through
music.
music. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's absolutely how that works, and I think that they're and I really love the idea that the Force is this egalitarian thing, whether or not you're sensitive to it or not, that you can contribute to it in your own way.
Absolutely, I agree.
And I love that. I will also just say that when they're going to rescue Hera, Eleni says, "Let's go, Chopper." And hearing a Twi'lek woman say "Let's go, Chopper" that's not Hera is extremely trippy. Like it
Yeah.
messed me up. Like I'm not kidding. I'm like, am I in Rebels right now? No, no, no. I'm in Bad
Yeah.
Batch right now. What the fuck is going on?
Chopper, so the 20 years, the 1918 years, actually, no, it'd be like 15 years since we
Yeah,
see
14
Chopper again.
years. Yeah.
Four, well, 14 years did not change Chopper a bit. They did not
No,
change him a bit.
and I remember specifically when we saw Cham and Eleni, I'm like, oh, we're not going to see Hera, are we? They're probably and then we pan down to Hera and Chopper. I'm like, oh my god, we're getting Hera and Chopper for 2 episodes in the Bad Batch, and what a treat that is. I love this is another thing. We saw Caleb, Kanan kill Doom earlier in the season in Aftermath. And we have seen the origins of Kanan, and we've seen the origins of the woman who will later fall in love with and start this rebel crew with. Just as we were seeing the seeds of the Empire be planted, we are also
Wow, wait,
seeing
I
the
didn't even think
seeds.
about that. Wow.
We're also seeing the seeds of the people who will destroy it.
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
I really like, I'm really noticing it, and it's really making the Rebels fan in me extremely happy. I'm really noticing in this rewatch. Well, and obviously it's not necessarily the purpose of the show, or it's any of its primary main objectives, but I really like the way there's going out of their way a little bit at times just to add those little connections in between Clone Wars and Rebels, make
they're
those
bridging the gap in a very major
bridge the
way.
gap a little bit, and I really like that. I really do like that.
And I think they'll do more of that in season 2. Again, we know we're getting Commander Cody in season 2, and I'm
That's going to be
interested to see
super
how
interesting.
how that plays out, and especially how his conversations play out with Crosshair, because we know that's the one thing we know about Cody is that he's going to be talking with Crosshair, and that's going to be such a weird conversation to have because again, we know that Cody was very loyal to Obi-Wan, but he didn't hesitate to shoot him down Order 66. So it's
Yeah.
it's freaking I love that side of it. I'll just say that. See, one more thing before we finish this episode and get a little bit more to the Rescue and Ryloth, though we've been talking about them a bit interchangeably. I want to talk about Howzer.
Howzer. All right, what do you got? What do you got?
I love Howzer's conflict in these 2 episodes. I love that stuff. Again, we see so many clones in this show rebelling against the programming. Again, it's the individuality versus homogeny argument all over again. Do you go with the program or do you strike your own path? Do you know what you do you go with what everybody else is doing, or do you have a different idea of what is right and or do you go with what everybody else is doing, or do you have a different idea of what's right to do? And
It's an excellent
absolutely,
question.
and this is absolutely another way of that playing into that, as Howzer has to deal with again very much Cham and Rampart are the angel and devil on his shoulders. They're both telling him things that he can see the merit of both of them, but he knows that Cham's right. And he knows that Rampart's wrong, but he is in duty to Rampart at this point, and not to like he is like logistically in duty to Rampart and not to Cham at this point. And he has to realize that his duty really is to Cham and not Rampart.
Yeah,
And
we see him have that. We see
yeah,
him have that struggle, and we see him have
yeah,
that moment. And it made me wonder, and I know there's been some speculation on this. A couple of hints have been dropped that maybe some of the clones, their inhibitor chips didn't fully work, or they were
yeah.
resistant to them. I highly suspect, for obviously, that Howzer may be one of them. You know, he's retained the paint on his armor. He takes his helmet off. He retains
Yeah.
some of that humanity and that individuality, much more
Yeah.
so than some of the other clones. So I hope he can show back up in
I really
season
do
two.
too. I really do wonder because again, yeah, he takes his helmet off, something we rarely see clones do in this series. He has the painted armor. We know which one he is. He retains that individuality, which is that foreshadowing, which is that visual foreshadowing that he is conflicted in that way, which I love. And you know that kind of that kind of leads us into the second one. And what I love also about the second one, I'm just looking right now is there's like Howzer begs Rampart to just think about this like Howzer's like I've been thinking about this to Rampart and Rampart goes leave the thinking to me, you have your orders, which is
Yeah,
perfect.
that's like
Like
perfect Rampart, you know?
that's perfect Rampart, that's perfect Empire, that's perfect
Yeah.
everything.
It's just like shockingly, obnoxiously arrogant and condescending. Like it's the Empire to a
And
T.
exactly, and the Empire doesn't want people to think because that's where they go wrong. But the Empire wants people to follow orders, and that is it's a perfect description of the Empire. I also love, by the way, I just saw this in my notes and I wanted to bring this up because I think it's hilarious that Cham doesn't reveal where Hera is because he also doesn't know. But even if he did, he wouldn't tell. And then Rampart goes to Eleni. He goes, Eleni, you're the reasonable one.
Oh, this
Um,
scene is so good. This scene is so
and
good.
and Eleni's like, and Eleni has that face like, I will literally cut a bitch over my daughter.
Yeah. What
Like
does she say? She says, I've seen how you treat your
treat your
allies. I'd rather be
be
your
your
enemy.
enemy. Yeah. Oh, it's so
Whew.
good. She
What a
is so
line.
savage.
What a
Again,
line.
she will cut a bitch, and I love that. I support that.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you got?
Um.
I don't have that much to be honest for rescue on Ryloth. What do you got?
So one of the things I want to talk about, and again, this is more meta fandom commentary, but again, this is important to be brought up. There was a lot of controversy about this episode about Devil's Deal, but that was fixed in Rescue on Ryloth. At the
Yeah.
end of the episode, Crosshair shoots Orn Free Taa, and it looks like a fatal wound.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Because then he
Um,
shows back up in
but
the book later on.
yeah, but we know that Paul S. Kemp wrote a Star Wars novel many years ago called Lords of the Sith that features Senator Free Taa in it, so he couldn't die. And a lot of people are like, "Oh, is this a retcon?" And I remember Alex Damon saying at the time, maybe maybe it'll be left up to interpretation. Like, oh, if like for the Clone Wars fans, he died here, but for the book fans, the shot wasn't fatal. But they specifically say in this episode that in Rescue on Ryloth that the shot was not fatal. So they literally call it the attempted assassination of Senator Orn Free Taa.
Yeah. I think
And I think that's extremely elegant, and I love how they do it here because it serves the story while keeping the canon intact.
yeah. I think it definitely serves the story. I think it's a bit too much for me. Like I don't take huge issue with this because it's not like I've not read the book, so maybe I haven't experienced the other side of it, but it's not such a massive moment that it's undermining, that it's impossible to look over. So I think it's all right, but it definitely did just feel like a bit of a have your cake. They would really wanted to have their cake and eat it too. Like they could have like shot him in the stomach, or like
I get,
somewhere
yeah,
where
shot
like it
him
would
like
be easier, where it's like,
less fatal of an area. Yeah.
yeah, just like he got shot with a precision, like one of Crosshair's precision laser bolts straight in the side of his head. The next
Yeah.
episode, like, oh yeah, he'll recover. He'll be fine. He'll make a full recovery. I'm
Yeah.
like, really?
Although I do like the
Really?
idea that Crosshair was ordered not to kill him, like that Crosshair is that accurate that he could fire a shot that
Oh
looked
yeah,
like it was going to
absolutely.
kill him but didn't. Like I do like that idea.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen what Crosshair can do. Like
Yeah. Again, he takes
he's
down
a
Gobi's ship
madman.
in one shot.
He's a master with the blaster.
Yeah.
What can you say?
He's cunning and I really like their use of him this episode. And yeah, I also let's see what else. I also really like the tension between Hunter and Omega on whether to help Hera or not.
Oh yeah, I think
Um,
it's a great moment.
because because again, they both have very valid points. Because I forget who said this. Let me just look up who said this. Oh, it's from a movie called it's from a movie called The American President that I really like. You only fight the fights you can win. You fight the fights that need fighting. And it's
Yeah.
that delicate balance of when do you like what it's about how much it matters and how likely it is that you can win. And Hunter is thinking like, I think this is too dangerous, and I don't think this is going to end up well for us. But Omega's backlash to that is you fight the fights that need winning.
Yeah, I think Omega is absolutely very much kind of the moral guidance for the crew in this episode, because we go back to this question which the Bad Batch often face of, you know, how much do we weigh our duty, our felt duty to the galaxy, to our morals, to what we think is right? How do we weigh that against wanting to survive, wanting to live another day? When do we stick out our necks? When do we not? And I mean, it's one of Star Wars' defining themes, is kind of the choice of people of how to use your gift, and for the Bad Batch, are they going to stay just kind of, working this dead end gig with Sid, being weapons dealers or whatever, or do they want to service something bigger? And thankfully they make the right choice in this episode. But I think it's a very interesting next chapter in this continuing question that kind of gets posed almost every episode to them.
Absolutely, and I think that this again, it's one of the driving things of Star Wars, and I love how much the Bad Batch is really connected to that moral core of Star Wars. Let's see. Frankly, I also just want to point out that Omega and Hera's escape in that shuttle, which I'm pretty sure is an unmodified Omicron attack shuttle or something that looks like it. So literally, they are the mini Bad Batch in that
Yeah.
case. Like that,
I love everything with Omega and Hera in this episode. It's so great.
perfect.
It's so wholesome.
No,
It's
no.
so awesome.
My also that line. My parents would never approve of this plan. I won't tell if you won't. No notes.
So
Absolutely
great. Yeah.
fantastic. No notes because again, they are these revolutionary fighters, but they're kids. They're kids. They're 10 and 11, I think, is how old they are.
Yeah. Like,
They're facing a huge galaxy in front of
yeah.
them, but they're just kids.
Yeah, I think that's a thing at the end of the day about Star Wars that always is a little bit strange to square when we with something where I take Star Wars. I wouldn't say I take it seriously all the time, but it means so much to me and I get so much out of it. And then at the end of the day, you have like this crew of like hardened special forces commandos basically. And then they've got like a freaking 11-year-old and they're like taking her into war zones all the time.
Yeah,
And you're like, when you really think about this, like,
yeah.
I mean,
But it
Star
happens
Wars
all
is a
the
very no
freaking
holds
time.
barred.
Yeah,
It's a very no holds barred
yeah.
compared to our standards, I
Yeah,
guess you could
because
say.
Anakin gets taken into a war zone when he's 9.
Yeah. I mean, is nothing new.
Yeah, it's not, we've been
it's
doing
nothing
this
new.
since we've been doing this since 1999 at least. But yeah, and I love I do really love the like this is their fight and they need to like they need to lead their generation, and I just kind of love that. I also just I want to talk about this, okay?
All right.
Where is it? Wow. Oh yeah. Brothers, what are we doing? We
Oh my
came
gosh, the
here
Hauser
to
speech.
free Ryloth from Separatist control, and we succeeded. But look around you. We're now being ordered to target the very people we swore to protect, and I will not be a part of it any longer. Who will stand with me? Earlier, he just says, what the Empire is doing is wrong. Those 7 words, what the Empire is doing is wrong, have never had more of an impact for me.
Yeah. Like
It's so
after
simple, but it is so impactful in
yeah,
all of the right ways.
it's the culmination of his struggle and
Yeah.
his internal working through of everything. And it's another great example of, Star Wars is all about choices. And this is an episode where there are a lot of choices and there's a lot of subtext and discussion of these choices. And, thankfully we see people make the right choices, but it's about the power of each individual. And he wants his brothers to reclaim their individual power, which had kind of been forcefully stripped from them by the Empire, obviously, with the inhibitor chips.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, what was I going to say? That I found it very interesting. I took note of this. So Crosshair's there when that whole uprising happens, and what does he order?
I cannot remember.
He orders their arrests, which is interesting because I would not have guessed he would order arrests for those clones. I would totally have thought he would have ordered execution because it's treason what they're doing. Again, I'm not trying to defend Crosshair here. I'm just saying under the Empire's laws, that would be treason. And I'd imagine they'd punish that by death, especially for clones, because again, they're expendable. Especially with the Project War Mantle and them transitioning into real people, soldiers, and not clones. You think they'd be extra expendable. But no, he orders their arrest. And I wonder if that's a story device, because maybe we could see him more in season 2. And I hope that's the case.
I would assume that's the case.
Or B, maybe it's a thematic device to show that maybe Crosshair's allegiance to the Empire is wavering.
That would be very interesting indeed.
Because again, we'll get to this when we get to that final arc, Return to Kamino and Kamino Lost, but Crosshair's chip is most likely out at this point. It is. Crosshair's chip is most likely out at this point. And
what makes you say that?
Well, because he said he removed it, and he got in Return to Kamino, and if you recall, he got damaged in the head in Reunion at the exact place where his inhibitor chip would be. So I think it was pointing us to the idea that his chip got damaged and he removed it of his own, stopped working to its full extent, and he removed it of his own free will. Sometime after the events of Reunion, but I'm wondering if, again, he does not, he chooses to stay with the Empire at the end of Kamino Lost, but he does save Omega from drowning in Kamino Lost. And I wonder if this here ordering for their execution and not murder is him slowly softening and realizing the Empire's effects on the galaxy, even if he is a part of it.
Yeah, we can only speculate, but that'd be quite interesting.
And I don't think I think that even if that is true, I don't think he's consciously thinking that. I think this is an absolute subconscious thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what else for this episode? I think as well, I think one great moment, unless you want to continue with this train of thought, is that moment when I can't remember, they're looking down on the refinery or one of the facilities, and they note how even though Ryloth was not a separatist planet but a Republic ally, the Empire is still fully conquering them and conducting a full military occupation. And I think it's such a cool moment that's when the clones, or that's when the Bad Batch, they really realize after what they saw in Raxus, this is where they really realize what's happening, and they realize that obviously the past is dying. Nothing matters to the Empire anymore as to what side you are on. You're all the same now, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the pasts are irrelevant because they stare at the same future. And yeah, I also there's this nice touch point at the end of the episode where Eleni offers to pay Hunter and he refuses. I think this is a part of a more noble destiny for the Bad Batch. We're gonna see the next episode that, again, it's gonna be a 2 steps forward, 1 step back thing, because they're gonna get involved in a criminal gang war in the next episode.
True.
Literally, but then they're gonna save a clone from the an endangered clone from the Empire in the episode after. So like it's really like it is so it really is a constant tango basically for them between what they're going to be. And but absolutely I loved all three of these episodes, and I think that specifically Hera and her family affirming the value of family to Omega is really important, and I love the prominence of that in this episode. Do you got anything else for any of either of these two episodes, or
Not really. I mean, I think these are fantastic. I think the first Devil's Deal, I think on its own, definitely dragged a little bit for me. Wasn't the best episode in some respects, but it was absolutely worth the payoff for Rescue on Ryloth. This episode was a chef's kiss, in my opinion. Absolute chef's kiss. Had so much to say, did so many things right. It was amazing. The stakes were there, the urgency was there, the emotion was there. And I mean, these episodes are just, as usual, I can't stop raving about how drop dead gorgeous they are. Every single shot, I'm just like, beautiful. Holy cow, are you kidding me?
And like, and props absolutely, because I know that the writers team like was newer on the Bad Batch, like they hadn't done as much as on the Clone Wars Rebels, but like they didn't skip a beat on Hera. They didn't skip a beat on Hera. I felt like I was right back in it watching.
Oh yeah,
100%. The young version of Hera Syndulla. Like it felt so incredibly like having Hera back for 2 episodes was unreal, frankly. And Vanessa killed it. Robin Atkin-Downs killed it. Fairlith Young absolutely freaking killed it. And like, yeah, so much great stuff in these 3 episodes. I think that is going to be it for this episode of In a Galaxy. Before we end, let's talk about what we're doing next week. Next week, episode 90 of Star Wars in a Galaxy. We're getting to episode 90. We're going to be covering 2 more episodes of The Bad Batch, the 4th to last and 3rd to last episode of The Bad Batch season 1.
We're closing in. We're closing in.
Infested and War Mantle. But until then, I think follow us on Twitter at In a Galaxy Pod, Instagram at Star Wars in a Galaxy. I got some news about this, and I'm not sure if I'm going to edit this out if this doesn't pan out. But as Twitter has been like absolutely crumbling to the ground, there have been a number of alternative social media platforms that I've been looking at, and then one of them is called Hive. So In a Galaxy right now, I'm setting up In a Galaxy's Hive account. So follow us on Hive at In a Galaxy Pod as well. You can follow me on my personal account on Twitter at UchiFan327. Follow our trivia show at In a Galaxy Trivia. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, anywhere you listen to your podcast, we will be there. If we're not, email us swinagalaxy@gmail.com. And I think, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Star Wars in a Galaxy. And I think until next time, may the Force be with you always.